Let's get to count one. So, and when we go into the next section, if you aren't familiar with a complaint, generally speaking, you're going to see a sentence like this that says all previous paragraphs are incorporated herein by reference. This is just like it's just a basic sentence saying everything that we just read through, assume that it's also in this subsection. This is just basically to say so that no defendant can come in and say, well, you didn't actually allege that those facts applied to this particular account and try to be sneaky or tricky or whatever. So just for the uninitiated, that's just what that means. Okay. The producers and the Rust production companies. So now for count one, sorry, for anybody listening, count one, negligent, intentional, willful, or reckless misconduct resulting in wrongful death. So this is the negligence claim, the wrongful death claim, the, recklessness situation. So now we're going to get into those details. The producers and the Rust production companies, each of them individually and collectively, once they made the decision to use real guns on the set, had a duty to A, provide a reasonably safe production set environment, B, hire, train, supervise, and oversee crew who were qualified to ensure the safe procurement, storage, maintenance, transportation, transfers from person to person, and operation of deadly weapons, including the revolver that killed Miss Hutchins, as well as ammunition on the production set. C, design, establish, adopt, implement, monitor, and oversee reasonable safety protocols to protect the safety of all cast and crew on the site, including Miss Hutchins. D, design, establish, adopt, implement, monitor, and oversee reasonable safety protocols for the procurement, storage, inspection, maintenance, and operation of all deadly weapons and ammunition on the Rust production, including safe distances between real weapons being operated and cast and crew, safe handling and aiming of real weapons to ensure no weapon is ever aimed at any human being, reasonable protection of cast and crew from the risks of deadly weapons, and reasonable inspection of weapons for safety. E, train all those handling firearms in basic gun safety rules and the operation of the revolver fired in this case, including how to check to see if it was empty or loaded only with blank rounds. F, ensure guns were not loaded but completely empty during lineups for shots. G, ensure there was no live ammunition on set or placed in any of the guns used during the production. H, conduct multiple inspections of every gun handed to an operator or actor to ensure the gun was empty, or if needed for a shot, only contained blank rounds and no live ammunition. There's a lot of duties here. I, inspect any weapon handed to an operator, including actors, to ensure such weapon is free of live ammunition and safe for operation in relation to the intended use of the weapon. J, ensure that the armorer was in exclusive possession of all weapons and ammunition at all times, except to the extent necessary for shooting scenes. K, prevent live ammunition from infiltrating the production set. L, ensure all operators of a real revolver, including defendant Baldwin, named him specifically, had adequate training, background, experience, and licensing with such deadly weapons. M, reasonably respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of cast and crew on the Rust production regarding weapon safety and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling and safety. And N, finally, investigate all unexpected near misses or discharges of guns or explosives on set to determine the root cause and prevent any other weapon safety breaches. Wow, that's a lot of duties. And we've got a lot of defendants that may fit into each of these different duties, depending on which ones we're talking about. A lot of these are going to be, provide a reasonably safe production set environment. I think, most likely the producers here, the production companies, hire, train, supervise, and oversee crew who were qualified. That's again talking about producers here. Design, establish, adopt, implement the reasonable safety protocols. Producers here. Design, establish, adopt, implement, monitor, and oversee reasonable safety protocols for the procurement, storage, blah, 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 about the weapons and the ammunition. Okay, yes. And then, talking about training, talking about, Then going down to a more granular level, we're talking about ensuring that the guns are not loaded. Those are we're talking about the armorer, we're talking about the assistant director, we're talking about Baldwin himself. So these different duties are going to apply to different defendants depending on which duty we're talking about. But basically, all of them are going to connect to one another because they are all working together on this one project. Even though they have different roles within this project, they are all operating for the same goal, and that is to make a movie, right? So all of these duties are present regardless of who has what, because they're all working together. Even if, one person has been found liable, uh, most likely there's going to be a bunch of people that are held liable in this case, um, assuming that the facts play out the way that we're thinking that they're going to play out. Um, this is a lot, and they've really laid it out very specifically from top to bottom. I think this is very comprehensive. So as to the first element about was there a duty, there's a lot of duties here that have been alleged. Um, okay, paragraph 74. Oh, now they're talking specifically about Alec Baldwin. Defendant Baldwin had a duty to A, learn the gun safety rules before picking up a firearm on set. B, learn how to safely operate and self-check the specific revolver in this case to make sure it was not loaded or was loaded with blank rounds. Now, okay, so that could be because they may be anticipating that he'll say, no one gave me training. No one, no no one, the armorer didn't sit me down and train me. Even though realistically, the power dynamic between those two could be a situation where, you know, she's a young woman. He's an A-list movie star that who is known to have a certain reputation for uh let's just say not necessarily being the nicest person, let's say. So, how is she gonna try to hold him down for a training? So they're saying you have a responsibility to take it upon yourself to learn the safety of handling a firearm, regardless of what anybody else has set up for you. This is something that you were supposed to do on your own. And that's true. It is true. Okay, now C. So he also had a duty to never point the gun at any person. D, always treat the gun as if it were loaded. E, be aware of the people present in the direction where he was pointing the gun and beyond. F, keep his finger away from the trigger or not operate the revolver's hammer until he decided to shoot. Now that or is doing some work for this sentence, because if you remember, I mean, and this is why you don't do sit down interviews with George Stephanopoulos when there's still an investigation going, and you know that there's going to be a civil lawsuit that's filed in this case, is because, I mean, you know that your words are going to come back to haunt you. And this is what they're saying, that they're saying he was supposed to keep his finger away from the trigger. He would probably say, my finger wasn't on the trigger. And David Halls has made, or his legal team, I guess, has made a statement saying, I didn't see Alec Baldwin's finger on the trigger, which is a self-serving statement. So, you can take it at however you want, whether or not you believe that or not. But that is a self-serving statement because David Hall is also a defendant in this case. And if Alec Baldwin is not responsible, that means that there's a less likelihood that David Hall would be responsible, potentially. But by saying that he had a duty to keep his finger away from the trigger or not operate the revolver's hammer until he decided to shoot, that right there, because that's the famous statement, right? Where he said, I let the hammer go and the gun went off. I let the hammer go and the gun went off. And he said it like several times as if somehow that's better. But what they're saying is, even that, even if you try to say that you didn't pull that trigger, you should not have pulled that hammer back unless you knew that you were ready to shoot. All right. He also had a duty to G, not shoot the gun during the lineup of a shot. H, ensure the persons hired as armorers were experts in firearm safety. And this is pointing to his role as a producer, I believe, because I don't think that you could say that any basic actor in a movie who's not also a producer could have any kind of control as to who's being hired. But I think that this is pointing to him as not just the actor, not as a writer for the film, but also as a producer, that he has some kind of control over who's being hired here. And he might come back and say, I didn't have any control over that. That was not something that anyone ever talked to me about. But then, okay, we've got a whole list of other duties that he had here. He also had a duty to accept a weapon for use on the set from personnel qualified to store, maintain, inspect, and handle deadly weapons. J, conduct or observe a visual inspection of any weapon before taking possession of the weapon. K, never aim a deadly weapon at cast and crew at the Rust production unless, when required to do so for a scene, cast and crew were adequately protected. Because that's also a point, right? That he's saying, during his interview, he's like, oh, during when we were checking the lighting or whatever, and she was telling me what to do. He was like very softly blaming the victim, saying that he was only doing what she was telling him to do. She was saying, okay, lower it, lower it, lower it, lower it, lower it, pull it back, pull the hammer back, pull the hammer back. They're still saying, they're like, okay, even assuming that is the way that things played out, you should have known that you can't do that unless there is a certain level of protection between where you're pointing the revolver and where other people are. Making sure that there are as few people as possible in the direction that you are firing. And if there absolutely have to be people there, let's say for example, we've talked about this on this channel. We've talked about how, there could be a scene in a movie where the revolver is pointed and at the camera, because the camera is filming, so that you as the viewer are looking from the perspective of somebody who is about to be shot, right? Like there are those kinds of scenes in movies. So there could be a situation where there's a gun that's pointed directly at a camera. Okay, that's fair. But when you do that, you have to make sure that there are certain safety precautions around that, right? So whether that is physical barriers between him and other people, or making sure that there's absolutely nothing in the chamber, that kind of thing. Yeah, someone in the chat said plexiglass shield. Of course. Okay, he also had a duty to, okay, let's see. We read K. To L, ensure any cast and crew are protected against any potential discharge of a weapon he wielded. And M, avoid recklessly discharging any deadly weapon, which is a criminal offense in the state of New Mexico. This statement, the second half of the sentence right here, which is a criminal offense in the state of New Mexico. It's interesting that they added this because it's not necessary for this complaint, but it is interesting that it's kind of pointing over to, oh, by the way, there should be criminal charges that are filed here. Interesting. Rick Cormier, thanks for the super chat. He says, I agree in that the interview, I definitely got she was asking for this because he kept saying she was directing me to do things. Yeah, no, I definitely think so. And it was something that he was trying to be very soft about it, because I think he knows, like anyone would know, anyone with half a brain would know that, like, that going on a national interview and saying, the person that is dead, the person who left behind a husband and a 9-year-old son, essentially was asking for it because she told me to do it. That's a really bad look. It's a really bad look. But it's almost like he couldn't help himself. He couldn't sit in that hot seat that he's been kind of placed in ever since October 21st. And so I think that he just, I don't know. I mean, it was a terrible idea to go on that interview, and this is why, right? I mean, not to say that by going on that interview, he brought this lawsuit on himself, because the lawsuit would have happened regardless of the interview. The problem is that he added so much information before there was any kind of a lawsuit. He gave them so much for their investigation that made it so much easier for them to gather stuff and to kind of anticipate some of his arguments, to say like, "Oh, I didn't pull the trigger." Well, you pulled the hammer and you admitted it on national TV. Okay. So that's one nail in your coffin that you can't back out of. You can't try to you can't try to explain yourself out of that, to say, "Well, I didn't really pull the hammer." Okay, but you said you did months and months ago. So, anyhow, okay, let's continue on. Paragraph 57, or sorry, 75. Each of defendants Gutierrez Reed and Seth Kenny. Now, remember, Seth Kenny is the guy that has the prop company, that he was providing a lot of props for the company, or for the set. Each of defendants Gutierrez Reed and Seth Kenny had a duty to exercise reasonable care in the procurement, inventory, storage, inspection, maintenance, and operation of all weapons and ammunition on the Russ production, to prevent live ammunition from infiltrating the production and otherwise provide a reasonably safe production set environment. Yeah, they did. They both did, because he was providing the props and she was the armorer. So both of them had responsibility. Okay. Defendant Zachary had a duty to exercise reasonable care in the supervision of defendant Gutierrez Reed and Seth Kennedy. Oh, that's just a little bit of a typo. That's okay. We can look past that. And Seth Kenny, and otherwise provide a reasonably safe production set environment. So, because technically, remember, Sarah Zachary was technically Hannah Gutierrez Reed's supervisor for set. Even though I guess they were having issues, but she was supposed to supervise. So regardless of whether they had decided that all of the weapons on set were supposed to be only, someone said the Kennedys are involved as well. No, they're not. That's just a typo. um, so, regardless of whether between them they were like, no, 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 Hannah's the only one that handles firearms. If you're the supervisor of the armorer, you are also 100% responsible for any kind of accidents that happen with the weapons on set. So, doesn't matter what kind of agreement you went into on set, or what kind of drama was going on between the two of you. Doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the law doesn't really care. You still hold a certain amount of responsibility as a supervisor. Paragraph 77, defendant Halls had a duty to A, provide a reasonably safe production set environment, B, refrain from delivering deadly weapons on the production to actors for usage without necessary background, training, and experience to do so, C, inspect any weapon being transferred to an actor in front of the actor to see if it was loaded or empty, and if loaded, to ensure it contained only blank rounds and not live ammunition. D, accurately report the scope, nature, and extent of any visual inspection performed on a deadly weapon before transfer to an actor. And E, investigate and reasonably respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of cast and crew on the Rust production regarding misfires of weapons, near misses, and general weapon safety, and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling, weapons handling safety. So for him, it's like they're talking about the in the moment itself. He had a duty to ensure that the custody of the weapon was proper, that it was going from the right person to the right person. At the same time, he also had a duty to inspect. He also had a duty to accurately report the visual inspection. So if he says that he inspected and he said it's a cold gun and it's not a cold gun, he breached his duty by saying it's a cold gun when it's not. Now, if he just says, "Well, I didn't know how to check. No one told me how to check, and so I thought that I was doing the right thing," that's not going to fly either. Because if you are going to step into someone's role, like I said before, I've said this several times, if he is going to step into somebody's role, um, you're gonna take the some of their responsibility as well if something goes wrong. And at the same time, because he was the assistant director, he also had the duty to investigate and reasonably respond to complaints as well, just like all of the other producers that had people complaining to them about safety on set. All right. Paragraph 78. Each of the defendants, either individually or through its owners, management, employees, or agents, negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully breached his or her duties to Halyna Hutchins by deciding not to take the actions described above that were required of them or taking actions that violated such duties. Yeah. So then we've got, so like I said before, 4 elements for wrongful death action. First was duty. They just went through all of the defendants here and either lumped up all of the producers and the production companies for the broader scale, like that they were supposed to make sure that that certain processes were in place. They were supposed to ensure that people were actually following the safety protocols that were set up, et cetera, et cetera. And then they went through each of the individuals that were there, having to do with the actual ammunition, having to do with the actual weapon, and that were there with the handoff of the weapon itself. I mean, they've gone through, they've checked every single box for duty for each of these defendants. And then all it takes is one paragraph to say, okay, they all breached their duties because none of them did what they were supposed to do here. So we have that box checked as well. All right. Okay, and okay, so and sorry, excuse me. Paragraph 79. The producers and the rest production companies negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully, individually, collectively, through their agents or employees, committed the following acts and omissions. Okay, here we go. A. Chose to hire the cheapest crew available rather than hiring, training, and supervising crew who were qualified to ensure the safe procurement, storage, maintenance, transportation, transfers from person to person, and operation of deadly weapons and ammunition. So here we're talking about, I mean, I've talked about this before as well, that when it comes to people like Hannah Gutierrez Reed, where people were saying that she was unqualified for her job, we're going to be talking about negligent hiring. So that is kind of enveloped into this negligence claim, but certain defendants will basically have that against them for this. B, they knowingly hired a wholly unqualified armorer to act as the weapons master for the gun-heavy Western era Rust production. And this is important too, right? Because we're not just talking about a movie where there's just one scene with a gun, right? That this is just like there just is like one gun on this entire set. We're talking about a gun heavy Western era Rust production. So they should have anticipated that gun safety would have been an issue. Hey Kurt, hands of a law, good to see you in the chat. So that's what this description is doing, is to say that this was a gun heavy Western era Rust production. They absolutely should have known that this was going to be an issue. And so they should have spent some money on people who were super qualified. Okay. Anyhow, C, chose to require the armorer to split time working in a second role as assistant props master. So that was somebody's decision. Somebody's going to be held responsible for that decision specifically. D, chose to cut corners and not strictly enforce the industry standard gun safety protocols on set, including proper storage, inspection, maintenance, and operation of firearms and ammunition, presenting live ammunition on the set, and preventing a gun with loaded ammunition from being handed to an untrained actor. So, who are each of these decision makers, right? Who's making each of these decisions to cut these different corners? That's going to be coming out in discovery. E, chose not to require that all actors be trained in basic gun safety rules and in use of the specific revolver by the production's armorer before operating a firearm. So now number one, you've got the armorer's responsibility to train people, but then you've also got the responsibility of somebody to say, no, we have to make sure that everyone on set who is handling a firearm, regardless of whether they're an actor, an armorer, a prop person, whoever, anyone who is handling a firearm has to be trained in basic gun safety rules. The fact that there was allegedly no training in basic gun safety rules is bad for the defendants. Really, really bad for the defendants. F, they chose not to require all cast and crew to be protected against the risk of firearms at all times, in parentheses, whether by remote video monitors or shielding equipment. So that's also another point is that, we talked about plexiglass. We talked about, physical barriers, but we live in a modern era, right? And they even in Hannah Gutierrez Reed's complaint for her civil lawsuit, she talks about how they had video monitors because they were concerned about COVID protocols or whatever. So they had people that had to be watching on video about to maintain eyes on what was going on scene. So they had that. Why didn't they use that for safety besides COVID safety? G, they chose not to require multiple inspections of every weapon handed to an operator, including defendant Baldwin, to ensure such weapon was unloaded or free of dangerous ammunition and safe for operation in relation to the intended use of the weapon. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if that's true, that's bad. H, they chose not to ensure that the armorer was in exclusive possession of all weapons and ammunition at all times, except to the extent necessary for shooting scenes. They chose not to ensure all operators of a real revolver, including defendant Baldwin, named specifically, had adequate training, background experience, and licensing involving such deadly weapons. And J, they chose not to investigate or reasonably respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of the cast and crew on the Rust production regarding weapon safety and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling and safety. So we're talking about not just investigating, not just, shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production if necessary. They are literally putting money in front of Halyna Hutchins' life at the end of this. I don't think anybody we can't assume, I should say, we can't assume that people are making that decision consciously. Like, oh yeah, of course we're going to put money in front of, the health and safety of people on set. Of course, we care more about money than we do about, whether or not someone like Halyna Hutchins lives. Like, no one on the front end of that is probably thinking that. Probably. I would assume that. I'm not going to assume any sort of malintent where there is no evidence of it, right? But on the backside of this, it's easy to see that that's essentially what was happening, where somebody is making these decisions to cut corners, and they're cutting some massive, massive safety protocols. That's putting money before people, and that's a bad look. Theophrastus 3.0, thanks for your super chat. He says, if this happened in a military exercise, the commander would be responsible even if he didn't fire the fatal shot. If he did, prison would be likely. I mean, yeah, everyone who is in charge of either the person who's handling the weapon, or somebody who's just above them, or someone who's in charge of the weapon itself, or in charge of the ammunition itself, all the way up to the top is going to be held responsible. Because safety is a basic need on any set. Okay, paragraph 80. In addition to his acts taken as a producer, Defendant Baldwin recklessly or willfully committed the following acts and omissions. So, at the very least, recklessly, but also maybe willfully. A, chose to accept a weapon for use on the set from personnel who is not qualified to store, maintain, inspect, and handle deadly weapons. Talking about the assistant producer there, or assistant director, sorry, excuse me. B, chose to handle a real revolver during the lineup of a scene when a dummy or stand-in prop would have been sufficient. C, chose not to conduct or observe a visual inspection or loading of the weapon before taking possession of it, or otherwise verify that the revolver did not contain any dangerous ammunition. D, took intentional acts to allow the firing pin of the revolver to hit a bullet and cause the revolver to be discharged, including pulling or cocking the hammer and releasing the firing pin. E, pointing the gun at Halyna Hutchins and the cast and crew of Rust within a dangerous distance and without any personal protection for them. And F, recklessly caused a deadly weapon to discharge, which is a criminal offense in the state of New Mexico. There it is again. That's another reference to the New Mexico criminal code. Interesting that they've done that multiple times, specifically talking about defendant Baldwin here. 81. Paragraph 81. Defendants Gutierrez Reed and Seth Kenney negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully committed the following acts and omissions. A, procured live ammunition and allowed the live ammunition to be used on the production of the Rust film. So not just procuring it, but also allowing it to be used. B, they failed to inspect each dummy bullet on the set of Rust to ensure that no live ammunition had infiltrated the supply of dummy bullets. C, they chose not to inspect the weapon that was handed. It says has handed. I think it was supposed to be was handed to defendant Baldwin, which was loaded with live ammunition. D, defendant Gutierrez Reed did not accurately report and disclose the scope, nature, and extent of her visual inspection and misled the cast and crew regarding his inspection by purportedly saying, quote, cold gun, unquote, to cast and crew regarding the revolver at issue, knowing that she had not adequately inspected the revolver and individually verified each bullet contained in the revolver as being a dummy bullet and not a live bullet. E, he chose not to adequately train and supervise the cast and crew on the Rust production who were operating or in the presence of firearms. And F, failed to maintain or monitor the custody of all firearms and ammunition on the Rust film production. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. So, I mean, it's going all the way down to, all the way down from just procuring these rounds, and then also not inspecting them, just generally speaking on set, not inspecting the ones that went directly into this revolver, not accurately reporting the fact that they are either hot or cold. Now she's probably going to dispute subparagraph D here, where it's talking about her, that she didn't accurately report and disclose the scope, nature, and extent of her visual inspection, because she's going to say, hey, I couldn't. They wouldn't let me. No one told me that they had started rehearsing for this scene, and no one told me that they had taken the revolver. Now, of course, it still is within her responsibility to make sure that no one else is touching that revolver if she is the only person that's supposed to be touching it, right? Because she's the one that's in charge of safety of all of the weapons. So, and that's what's coming on here with subparagraph F, that she failed to maintain or monitor the custody of all firearms and ammunition on the Rust film production. Regardless of whether other people were stepping in and making her work that much harder, like I said before, she had two options: either fight to keep her job within only her control, or quit. That's all. That's what you got. Paragraph 82, defendant Zachary. So Sarah Zachary, this is the person that is in charge of Hannah Gutierrez Reed. Defendant Zachary negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully did not supervise defendant Gutierrez Reed and Seth Kennedy. Says Kennedy again. little typo, and otherwise provide a reasonably safe production set environment. Interesting. Very, very simple allegation against her. Okay. Defendant Halls negligently, intentionally, recklessly, or willfully committed the following acts or omissions. A. Deliver the firearm to Defendant Baldwin without possessing the necessary background training and experience to perform this function. Meaning he's not trained to handle firearms on set. Boom, that's it. B. Declared the revolver to be safe without disclosing his failure to fully check the weapon. Any reasonable person would have listened to what he said and said, okay, yeah, you checked it and it's cold. You know what you're talking about. Okay, cool. Let's move forward. He has the responsibility if he's going to uh again step into that role where he's saying, yes, I checked it, and yes, I know what I'm doing, and yes, this is a cold gun, and that's not actually the case. Any of those things are not actually the case. Liability. C. He did not inspect the weapon being transferred to Defendant Baldwin or witness an inspection of the weapon to assess its condition and determine whether any bullets loaded in the revolver were dummy bullets and not live ammunition. Hey, Aaron Catron, thanks so much for your super chat. Thank you, thank you. Super kind. Okay, let's see. That was, I believe, D. E. He did not reasonably investigate or respond to complaints, concerns, and reports of cast and crew on the rest production regarding misfires, near misses, or weapon safety, and take all action necessary to resolve such complaints, concerns, and reports, including shutting down or suspending the production, delaying the production, inspecting all weapons and ammunition on set, etc., etc., and auditing records to ensure all personnel were adequately trained in weapons handling and safety. Paragraph 84, each of the defendants utterly disregarded the consequences of their actions and knew or should have known that his or her acts and omissions were substantially certain to result in injuries or death to cast and crew members, including Ms. Hutchins. So this is getting to they either knew or they should have known and they ignored it. Talking about at least recklessness there. They knew or should have known. If they knew and disregarded, could be intentional, but at the very least reckless. Paragraph 85. Each of the defendant's acts and omissions were a direct and proximate cause of Halyna Hutchins' death and the resulting damages set forth below. So here we have element number 3 of the negligence claim, right? We've got 4 elements total. We talked about duty, we talked about breach of the duty, then we talked about harm, I guess, is the third element. So we know that they've alleged that she died. Number 4, that it was a direct and proximate cause. Proximate cause is basically hinting at was this a foreseeable result of these issues? Is it foreseeable that an armorer who is not maintaining proper control over the ammunition and the weapons on set, that in not doing that, this kind of a harm could result? Well, of course, it's easy, right? We're not talking about, that someone, had some kind of a shock and then a heart attack and then died from that, like we're not talking about that, result because someone had a shocking heart attack because they saw this thing happening. That would be an issue of proximation, right? Proximate cause. We're talking about legal cause. We're talking about foreseeability. So what we are talking about is literally someone got shot because the weapons were not being watched. The weapons were not being inspected. The ammunition was not being watched. It was not being inspected. So that's just one example. So each of these defendants there has to be proximate cause between their particular breach and the actual harm that resulted. But I mean, all of these, it's pretty clear, right, that these kinds of problems are going to result in someone getting hurt from one of the weapons going off, because of the fact that everything is rushed. Everything is rushed means that safety becomes an issue. Safety becoming an issue on a set that is very gun heavy and set in the West, in the Old West, Yeah, that makes sense. So proximate cause, I think, is going to be relatively easy in this case. Paragraph 86, each of the Rust production companies, in addition to being directly liable, are vicariously liable for the acts and omissions of their directors, officers, members, managers, employees, and agents as alleged herein. And this is just kind of tying it all with a nice little bow, basically saying if one person is liable, then the rest of these guys are liable because they are all vicariously liable for the acts and omissions of one another because they're all trying to work on this project together. They all have the ultimate same aim. None of these breaches by any of these individuals or any of these production companies, none of these breaches are like any individual kind of going rogue and doing something for themselves, right? Like they're trying to work within the scope of their responsibilities for the jobs that they were hired to do. So, and the job that they were hired to do was on a grand scale to make this movie. Okay. That is the negligence, the wrongful death claim, the negligence, recklessness, intentional thing.